In the golden age of Hollywood, two men defined rugged masculinity on screen: Burt Reynolds and Clint Walker. They were more than actors. They were symbols of strength, charm, and that unmistakable old-school grit that audiences adored. But behind the cameras, away from the lights and fame, there was a bond between them that few truly understood. For decades, Burt Reynolds stayed silent about Clint Walker, about the friendship, the rivalry, and the heartbreak that followed. But just before his passing, Burt finally opened up, revealing a truth that left fans stunned. It wasn't about fame, fortune, or jealousy. It was about loyalty, loss, and an unspoken respect between two Hollywood giants who saw themselves in each other. Reynolds often described Clint as the kind of man Hollywood doesn't make anymore. And when he spoke about him for the last time, his words were filled with emotion, nostalgia, and regret. Clint Walker, known for his towering frame and unforgettable role in Cheyenne, became one of the first true television cowboys, a man whose quiet confidence captured America's heart. Burt Reynolds, on the other hand, was the wild spirit of 1970s cinema, breaking rules and redefining stardom. Together, they represented two sides of the same coin, one calm and stoic, the other fiery and fearless. But behind that public image was a private story, one that Reynolds carried with him for years. And when he finally broke his silence, what he revealed wasn't just about Hollywood. It was about brotherhood, forgiveness, and the pain of losing someone who once understood you completely. When people think of Burt Reynolds, they picture the smirk, the charm, and that mischievous spark that made him one of the most beloved stars of the 1970s. But long before he became a household name, Burt was just another struggling actor trying to make his way through the maze of Hollywood. It was during those uncertain years that he crossed paths with Clint Walker, a man who would unknowingly shape his outlook on fame, strength, and humility. Clint Walker was already a star by the time Burt arrived in Hollywood. Known for his role as Cheyenne Bodie in the hit TV Western Cheyenne, Clint had become the face of rugged American heroism. He was tall, quiet, and impossibly kind, a real-life cowboy who carried himself with the dignity of a man who didn't need to prove anything. Burt, on the other hand, was still searching for his big break. "I used to look at him," Reynolds once said, "and think, that's the kind of man I want to be. Confident, grounded, and just decent." Their first meeting happened on a studio lot, where Burt had been cast for a small role. He was nervous, unsure if he belonged. Clint, noticing his unease, walked over, extended his hand, and said, "You'll do fine, kid. Just be yourself." It was a simple gesture, but it left a lasting mark. That's who Clint was, Burt recalled years later. No ego, no attitude, just a good man in a business full of masks. Over time, the two grew close. They would share long conversations about acting, life, and the strange world they found themselves in. Clint often reminded Burt to stay humble and true to himself. "Fame comes and goes," he told him once, "but character, that's forever." Those words would echo in Burt's mind throughout his career, especially during the darker moments when Hollywood's pressure became too much. Despite their friendship, Hollywood had a way of turning allies into competitors. When Burt's fame exploded in the 1970s with films like Deliverance and Smokey and the Bandit, Clint's star had already started to fade. The industry was changing. Gritty anti-heroes were replacing clean-cut cowboys. Burt became the new face of masculine charisma, while Clint retreated quietly into semi-retirement. Yet there was never bitterness between them. Clint never envied anyone, Burt said. He celebrated other people's success. That's what made him rare. Still, fame took its toll on Burt. As his career soared, he found himself surrounded by people who cared more about his image than his soul. In interviews, he often mentioned how he missed the kind of honesty Clint had. Once, at a reunion event, Burt spotted Clint across the room and made his way over. They hadn't spoken in years. When Clint saw him, he smiled that familiar warm smile and said, "Still causing trouble, huh?" Burt laughed and hugged him tightly. "Always," he replied. That would be one of their last public encounters, but the memory stayed with Burt for the rest of his life. "He was the kind of man you don't forget," Burt said in a 2016 interview. When you meet someone like Clint, they stay with you forever. Clint Walker passed away in 2018, leaving behind a legacy that stretched far beyond television. And for Burt Reynolds, the loss of his old friend brought a wave of reflection. He was the last of a breed, Burt said quietly. There's no one like him anymore. But what Burt revealed next, his private memories of their final exchange, would show fans a side of both men that few had ever seen. It wasn't about stardom or fame. It was about a friendship built on mutual respect, silence, and the kind of loyalty that Hollywood rarely witnesses. Burt Reynolds and Clint Walker's connection wasn't just professional, it was personal, genuine, and born out of mutual respect. Their friendship began in the late 1960s, at a time when both men were carving their paths through a ruthless industry. Burt was still fighting to be taken seriously beyond his charm and good looks, while Clint, already famous for Cheyenne, was known for his calm, measured persona, a man of few words but tremendous presence. They first met on a studio lot, and according to those who were there, it was like watching two lions size each other up. Both were tall, broad-shouldered, and carried an aura of authority. But instead of rivalry, what emerged that day was something far deeper, an unspoken respect that would quietly last for decades. Reynolds once shared that Clint Walker reminded him of his father. Quiet, disciplined, and never needing to prove anything to anyone. Clint, on the other hand, admired Burt's energy and fearlessness. He had fire, Clint reportedly said, the kind that Hollywood loves but can't always handle. Their friendship was built on that balance, Burt's charisma and Clint's calm, each seeing something in the other that they perhaps wished they had more of themselves. They'd spend hours talking about more than just acting, about family, the pressures of fame, and how Hollywood often chews people up and spits them out. Reynolds would later admit that Clint gave him advice that stuck for life. Never chase the fame. Let your work be the thing they remember. It was wisdom Burt didn't always follow, but one he never forgot. When the cameras rolled, their professional paths crossed in small but memorable ways. Burt, still early in his career, would often visit sets where Clint worked just to observe him. He admired how Clint treated everyone, from the director to the lighting crew, with quiet kindness and dignity. He didn't act like a star, Burt recalled in one of his interviews. He acted like a man. But their bond wasn't without its silent struggles. Hollywood, with its constant competition and gossip, often tried to pit strong personalities against each other. Some insiders whispered that Burt's rising fame made Clint uneasy, while others claimed Burt envied Clint's steadiness. Neither ever confirmed it, but as Reynolds later revealed, in Hollywood, friendships don't break because of people. They break because of the business. Still, theirs didn't break completely. Even when years passed without them speaking, there was always a sense of connection. When Reynolds faced career lows and personal heartbreaks, he'd occasionally receive short, handwritten notes from Clint. They weren't emotional or poetic, just simple words like, "Keep your chin up. You've got more to do." And when Clint Walker suffered his near-fatal heart incident in 1971 when a ski pole pierced his chest and doctors believed he wouldn't survive, Burt reportedly called every day to check on his condition. Against all odds, Clint recovered, and Burt would later call it a miracle that reminded me some men are built stronger than others. Their friendship may not have been broadcasted or documented in tabloids, but those close to them knew it was built on real understanding. They were two men who'd seen the cost of fame, the loneliness behind the lights, and the value of having just one person who truly understood the weight of it all. When Burt Reynolds finally opened up about Clint years later, he didn't speak as a co-star or an admirer. He spoke like someone who had lost a brother. Clint Walker, he said softly in his final interview, wasn't just a cowboy. He was the kind of man every other man secretly wished he could be. As the years rolled on, Hollywood changed, and so did Burt Reynolds and Clint Walker. The 1970s brought fame, chaos, and a new kind of stardom that neither man had truly prepared for. Burt's career exploded with films like Deliverance and Smokey and the Bandit, turning him into one of the most recognizable faces in America. He was charming, daring, and living life in the fast lane. Meanwhile, Clint Walker, ever the reserved soul, quietly stepped back from the frenzy of show business. The two friends drifted apart, not because of anger or betrayal, but because of time and circumstance. Hollywood's whirlwind often separates even the closest of bonds. Reynolds once admitted, "You blink in this business, and 10 years go by." But even during those years of silence, Burt never forgot Clint. Whenever interviewers asked about actors he respected most, Clint's name always appeared on the list. In contrast, Clint rarely spoke publicly about his Hollywood peers. But when he did, Burt Reynolds was one of the few he praised. "He was wild," Clint once laughed in a rare interview. But he had a heart that most people never got to see. That comment, simple as it was, meant more to Burt than any award could. Their paths crossed again briefly in the early 1990s at a charity event in Los Angeles. Burt, older but still full of charm, spotted Clint across the room. Witnesses said that when the two men finally shook hands, it was like time had stopped. They stood quietly for a moment, no need for small talk or explanations. Both understood what had been lost and what still remained. Later, Burt confessed that moment hit him hard. "Seeing Clint again," he said, "was like running into a piece of your past that you didn't realize you'd been missing." They promised to stay in touch, but as always, life intervened. Burt's health began to decline in the 2000s, while Clint focused on his family and a quieter life away from fame. Still, there was a sense of unfinished business between them, a conversation that never happened, words that were never spoken. When Clint Walker passed away in 2018 at the age of 90, Burt Reynolds reportedly broke down. Friends close to him said it was one of the few times he openly cried. In one of his final interviews before his own passing just months later, Burt finally spoke about Clint Walker publicly. His voice trembled as he said, "I never got to tell him how much he meant to me. Clint was one of the last real men in Hollywood, solid, decent, and humble." Then he paused and whispered something that stunned everyone in the room. "His last words to me, I'll never forget them." That was the first time Reynolds hinted that their final exchange carried more weight than anyone knew. He didn't elaborate immediately, but those who knew him said he carried the memory like a quiet ache. Clint's final words had touched something deep inside him, a truth about friendship, life, and the fleeting nature of time. The bond between Burt Reynolds and Clint Walker was never built on publicity or fame. It was quiet, private, and painfully human. Two men who lived through the best and worst of Hollywood, bound not by ego but by mutual respect. And though their lives took different paths, in the end, it was clear that Clint had left a mark on Burt that time could never erase. When asked what he missed most about his old friend, Burt simply said, "The way he made me feel like I didn't have to be Burt Reynolds around him. I could just be me." When Burt Reynolds finally opened up about Clint Walker's last words, it wasn't during a glamorous Hollywood interview or a press event. It was in a quiet, reflective moment during one of his final recorded conversations, where the tone was softer, his voice heavier, and the past seemed closer than ever. Sitting in his Florida home, surrounded by memories of a lifetime spent on camera, Burt finally shared what Clint said to him the last time they spoke. "It was a phone call," Burt began. "Clint wasn't much for long talks, but when he called, you listened." His voice always had this calm, steady tone that could settle any storm. I remember him saying, "Burt, I think I've had my run. But don't you slow down just yet. You still have more to give." There was silence after that. Burt said he felt something in those words, something final. He wasn't saying goodbye outright, he continued. But I could feel it. There was a peace in his voice, the kind of peace that comes when a man has lived his life the way he wanted. Reynolds admitted that after hanging up, he sat alone for hours. "I didn't cry right away," he said. "I just kept replaying his words over and over. You still have more to give." It haunted me, and in a way, it pushed me to keep going. To Burt, those final words were more than just a farewell. They were a reminder of purpose. In a world where fame fades and applause dies, Clint had reminded him that legacy isn't about the spotlight. It's about heart. He was teaching me one last lesson, Burt reflected. That even when the lights go out, what matters most is the work you've done and the people you've loved. After Clint's passing in 2018, Burt found himself watching old episodes of Cheyenne. He said he didn't do it to remember the actor, but to reconnect with the man. When I saw him ride that horse, calm and confident, I thought, yeah, that was Clint, solid as a mountain. And I realized something. I'd spent so many years trying to be larger than life, while he was already everything a man needed to be, just by being himself. A few months later, in September 2018, Burt Reynolds passed away too. It felt poetic. Two Hollywood legends, connected in life and leaving the world not far apart in death. Fans began revisiting their stories, interviews, and behind-the-scenes moments, piecing together the quiet friendship that had existed between the two. And in doing so, they discovered something deeper, the humanity behind the fame. When asked once what he wished he could have told Clint before he died, Burt smiled sadly and said that he was right. I did have more to give, but now, I think I've given it all. Those were among the final words Burt ever spoke publicly about his friend. The story of Burt Reynolds and Clint Walker isn't just about two actors. It's about two men who stood tall in a world that often demanded masks and performances. It's about how real friendship survives, even when distance and fame try to break it. In the end, Clint Walker's final words became Burt Reynolds' quiet mantra, one he carried until his last day. You still have more to give. And maybe that's the message both men left behind for their fans, that even when life slows down and the applause fades, we all still have something left to give, a story, a lesson, a bit of heart. And for those who grew up admiring their strength, charm, and honesty, that's what makes their friendship so unforgettable. Two Hollywood legends gone, but never really gone. Because as long as we remember them, their words, their spirit, and their brotherhood live on forever.